First of all, most change initiatives don't succeed. If you look at any consultant study that measures change success 2-3 years down the road, a lot of times those organizations don't achieve the goals and objectives they set at the beginning. So the track record on change is not good. In fact, sometimes people wonder, haven't we learned anything new in the last 20, 30 years? Where's the best practices? Why do we continue to always do it the same old way? Secondly, and that's what I was really bringing up there, is that most people, they're not always going to say this to you. If you're the boss and I report to you, I'm not necessarily going to say I don't like your idea. But the reality is most people experience what we call mild to strong resistance to change. And if you really look at resistance, it sort of boils down to about 3 or 4 things. I don't understand it, or I get it, but I disagree with it, or I get it, it makes good business sense, but on a personal level, I don't like it, right? Or sometimes it can even be trust issues, meaning I don't know you, where are you going with this, what's the real agenda, etc., etc. So that's just my way of introducing that topic, that resistance is normal. The challenge as leaders is how do you get past that resistance. The number one predictor, if you will, of change failure or success is the quality of your communications. I was working in Alberta the last 2 days, and the organization I was working with, it was all around communications. How do you communicate better? And so what I want to do in the hour I've got with you is to show you a communications tool that really engages people and gets some energy for change. This is John Cotter is probably the biggest expert on change, and he says some of the mistakes people make around change, too top-down, command and control, not enough information going out there, sort of we'll tell them what they need to know. Peter, you mentioned my role at Molson, and I think back in the day when we merged with Carleen O'Keefe, and I'm going to talk about that today, I think we fell into that mindset. It was definitely top-down. We'll tell you what you need to know when you need to know it, and otherwise we won't tell you, right? No involvement. Now that's a killer. That's a killer, because if you can't engage people, not necessarily in the boardroom when you're deciding the change, but as you start to roll out that change, if you can't engage people, you're just not going to get the energy and momentum you need. And finally, no empathy, meaning employees aren't sure you really understand their perspective, and you're factoring that into the change. So let me now get to the tool, and this I call the 4-box model. I know I've worked a bit with Tim with this tool. In any change, you're moving from what I call status quo on the left to the change on the right. I call this the natural disconnect. You see, the natural persuasion pattern of anyone selling or communicating change is to talk up boxes 1 and 2, especially box 2. Don't forget the cheerleading. The natural thought pattern of the very people you're trying to engage and get on side, they're completely fixated on boxes 3 and 4. This is literally like you only speak Greek, I only speak Portuguese, and we're in the room trying to have a business conversation. I can't tell you how many meetings I go to as a consultant or a speaker, and it's just apples to oranges. We're completely missing the mark. I'm going to show you it can be any change, a new policy, a new program, a new system. In fact, what I'm going to do is take a very simple change that I alluded to. In the mid-1990s, again, I worked for a Toronto-based consulting firm, and at our office, we had about, I don't know, 50 people. We had different offices. And it was decided that WordPerfect is out, Microsoft Word is in. Sounds simple enough, but you have to understand, back then, first of all, we had about 5 or 6 word processing operators. They loved WordPerfect. They thought it was the best system ever, and they were even given a nice bonus on the quality of their work, and they were good at it. So this was not necessarily a popular change. But this time the communicator did it the right way. Instead of pumping box 2, you must start in box 1. People have to understand, why the heck are we even doing this? Because given everything else on my plate, you know, why are we doing this? So the senior person, or the communicator in this case, said, look, I want to talk to you about us moving from WordPerfect to Word. And I'm sure many of you are wondering, why are we doing that? Because I know how much you value WordPerfect. So let me explain. He said, as you know, we were getting a lot of, or some informal customer feedback that wasn't too favorable. So we hired a third-party market researcher. She's with us today. She's talked to all of our customers. And you can see from the results of her study that over half of our customers are telling us that even though they like us, that as a supplier to them, generally they'd like us to become more system compatible with them. And if even only half of those, and if they don't, they said they'd have to leave us. And he said, even if only half of those customers actually did what they say they'd have to do, we'd be down over 20% of our revenues. And as a family type business, we don't want to go there. So as you can see, what he's done here is he's really gone into box one first. He's used evidence. He's used third-party data. She talked to our customers. Our customers pay our salaries. The point is, if you do a good job in box one, that doesn't mean they love what you're talking about, but it's kind of like, okay, I see why I might want to listen. You've got my attention. So he did a good job in box one, and then he went up to box two. Now, in this model, I always suggest initially spend your least amount of time in box two. You can go back to box two later. I call that box five. But initially, the least compelling box to people in resistance is, in fact, box two. Now, me, I like box two because that represents opportunity. And so do people that typically, work through ACE Tech. But initially, you want to spend your least amount of time there. So he said very briefly, as I said, by moving to Microsoft Word, this will allow us to maintain and grow our customer base. And we'd like to believe it's a valuable skill for you, our employees, to have. But what I really want to talk about today, he said, is what we perceive might be some of your concerns with this change. And wherever possible, how we can help you with some of those issues and concerns. He said, I'm not suggesting we know all your issues, but we've tried to take the time to understand what some of those needs or concerns might be and how we might lessen some of those issues for you. For example, some of you are probably worried, could this hurt my pay? Because if you're bonused on the quality of your work, and if there's going to be more mistakes made, as there always is with the introduction of any new system and the learning curve that follows that, does this mean potentially you could be disadvantaged from a compensation point of view? He said, listen, that's a valid concern. We certainly want you to know that you're paid fairly. One thought we had, and we're open to other ideas, is we will remove that criteria from the performance management system and in its place substitute a different criteria that allows you to achieve your normal compensation package. We'll even work with you on what that criteria might be. Some of you are probably worried now you won't have a life or a work-life balance. Because if it's going to take longer as we learn the new system just to get the work done, again, because there's a learning curve, and because in that business we couldn't go home until the client's work was readied for the next day, does this mean for some of you, instead of leaving at your normal leaving time, you'll be here till 10 o'clock every night just trying to get the work readied? He said, again, we certainly want you to have proper work-life balance. One thought we had, we're open to other ideas, is we'll hire a couple of temps at each office to help with the overflow until such time as you tell us you're up to speed, at which point we'll give them adequate notice. He said, another concern for some of you, and I don't have the answer for this, is we now need you to implement the system because you're part of our IT department, but you've booked an extended summer holiday in Europe and we were just going into summer then. So, is this going to be a bit off-putting to your schedule? He said, listen, I don't have the answer for that, but I know that for this change to work, we need to come up with some options and solutions. I would like to invite a few of you, our employees, to let us know how we can best implement this system in a way that isn't disruptive to your vacation plans. He spent a lot of time in 3, and then he went up to box 4. And he said, finally, I'd like to talk about what's not changing. Those things you value that aren't impacted by this new system. People sometimes ask me, which of those boxes, in terms of relative importance, where do you spend most of your time? And I say, think of the 10 to 12-minute rule. And I said, I like to spend 3 minutes in box 1, a minute to a minute and a half in box 2, 5 minutes in box 3, and a minute to a minute and a half in box 4. What I'm saying is I like to spend about 80% of my time in the only 2 boxes that initially matter to someone in resistance. If someone's in resistance, the only 2 boxes to them that matter initially are 1 and 3. One is, prove to me we even need this. I've been here 17 years. Or is this just flavor of the month? So the first place, if I'm in resistance, I need to know the box 1. Show me the evidence, show me the proof. As soon as I understand box 1, if I'm in resistance, my mind shifts to box 3. It's like this. Okay, now I understand why we've got to do it, but do you understand my concerns or our team's concerns, and is there an opportunity to partner here, to collaborate? Or is this a done deal? That's box 3. So they want to know, why are we doing it, and do you understand my needs, and are you going to work with me? Then they'll go to box 4. And of course, in terms of, you know, box 4 is, for God's sakes, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, don't mess with this. I had someone yesterday said, this is good, don't change that. Right? So box 4 is those things that they believe need to be maintained, which, by the way, makes a lot of sense. Right? And then, coming back to your point, Adrian, box 2. Now, what happens is, initially I say 3 minutes in 1, a minute to a minute and a half in 2, 5 minutes in 3, a minute to a minute and a half in 4. Then I open up questions. So what I'm really saying to people is, I'd like to take 10 to 12 minutes to explain the reasons why we feel this is necessary, very briefly where we're heading with the change. Probably more importantly to you, I'd like to talk about some of what we see as your concern, what might be some of your concerns with this change, wherever possible, how we can help you with those issues. And finally, I'd like to talk about what's not changing, those things you value that are staying the same. And if you can give me 10, 12 minutes to do that, then I'd like to open up for questions. Now what happens is, when you open it up for questions, you get a lot of conversation, questions, and dialogue. That's good. They'll initially go more to 1, 3, and 4, but eventually they will say, so tell me about this new system or new policy again. And they're now bringing me back to box 2, and that's what I mean by box 5. The only difference is they're now listening. Before they would have tuned you out.